I'm Ashley Grossman. I'm from Liberty Global, although for many years I worked at Virgin Media as well. I describe this speech or presentation as Confessions of a Couch Potato. That's really because in many respects when people ask what I do and I try and explain to my kids or my family what I do, it's probably the best description. In my role, I am responsible for personalisation and discovery. And what that essentially means, if it means anything, is that I have a remit to work and focus on how customers find and engage with content. That increasingly today is linear, on demand, and content from any other source. The ethos, or the three pillars of that for me, are very much how well you understand what that content is. So that's understanding your metadata and the quality thereof. How well you understand what the user is doing in terms of the analytics, user journeys, their consumption, and how that is populated towards things like recommendations and search. And the third area, and the thing I'm focusing on today in this walkthrough, is really the UI, because a lot of this is about how that those two factors are presented to the customer. And there's not a competition between these things, obviously, but if any element is the one that the customer is most apparent of, it is that UI, and it is what they see and how they're engaged. Talk a little bit about Horizon TV. Horizon TV is our sort of flagship TV product across Europe. It's live now in about 8 countries, depending on which of the different platforms you measure. So we launched in 2012 with the first Horizon TV platform, and that's live in the Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany, and Ireland. That was then followed up with a slightly different hardware set and a slightly different back office on a program that went to Poland, Czech, and Austria, and also Latin America. In parallel as well to that, a Horizon Lite system was also deployed in East Europe on a lot of legacy boxes, where we took a very slimmed down set of functionality and put it onto a very low capacity, low power box as a way of bringing our legacy customers. Essentially, with the Horizon product, when it was launched in the time, it was very innovative. It was full of features. It had app integration. It was also a home network for DLNA type content. It functioned as a gateway device, so it was your set-top box, your hard drive, and your Wi-Fi router all in one. And it had multiple features. So recommendations were one of the features that was above the title in terms of how it was advertised and how it's promoted. Replay TV, which is here in the UK it's catch up, but that was a network recording of multiple channels, 7 days. And it was also multi-screen with the Horizon Go app. Obviously, things move on, and we're now 5 years ahead. So what's happened in terms of the project and the platform as it started to roll out? We started to refresh and add new features. But the sort of phase here that I'm talking about now is that we actually started a whole new, quite a revolutionary program of refreshing the design, looking into 2017 and beyond. So in order to deliver a new UI, for Liberty Global, surprisingly, this was a revolutionary step. It wasn't just about putting some new screens together and designing them. Part of the process was about building an entirely new internal culture of design and in feature development for products. The end-to-end integration and delivery process has also had to be completely transformed internally to support this in terms of scaling and going to multiple countries and planning for a system that will deploy and refresh and update several times a year, as opposed to one country at a time, few updates a year. So the speed and the scale is more important. In terms of the missions for this project, speed and reliability were top of the list. A lot of the screens, a lot of the designs were put in mind in terms of usability, but with every single feature, with every single junction and interaction, and with every single aspect of what the box does, speed was critical. Even something as basic and fundamental to cable as zapping channels, the focus on trying to get that down to the minimum time possible and look at where in that technical process, from the set-top box to the back end, things could be shaved or realized or improved, was critical. Usability was, as I say, critical, and that went many, many layers deep. One of the features, one of the key things of the previous Horizon UI was that essentially it is cyclical. The user's focus is always in the center. The menus, you move around that focus point. So you're either going left and right, cyclically, but your focus stays on screen, or you're going in and out in terms of multiple screens and depths. So while that's quite graphically very attractive, when you get into the deep layers of the UI and get into certain features and actions, some things take a lot of steps and a lot of clicks. And you'll see some of this. So there was the approach was generally flatten, simplify, and get it as sleek as possible. And then another pillar of this was also around the content and customer-centric aspect. That's about the discovery. That's about making sure that the UI acts as a suitable showcase for the content. And as things have evolved from linear, on-demand, and now incorporating apps, it's about broadening the scope of what could be showcased. So just as a quick comparison, we start with the home page and the main screen. On the left, and this is the same for all the slides, so it's going to be easy to follow, we've got the current and historic design. And on the right, we have the new design. This is now live in Poland, Czech, and Austria. So the cyclical menu with elements drifting off the screen there and you rotating in the middle, that has been replaced by a very flat, concise menu. The four main pillars of content are there and presented with search available and settings via an icon. Everything, therefore, is on the focus and you don't go off screen, but you do scan between the different areas. The size as well, the sort of disco dance floor, as we called it internally, has gone, and the menu is made as discrete as possible within it. The pillars are important, and I'll take you through all of these and sort of explain some of the philosophy behind it. In terms, though, starting with the basic case of the video player. Obviously, set-top box, hard drives, network hard drives in some cases, pausing live TV, rewinding, fast-forwarding, playing out VOD. The video player is actually the most interfaced with screen, if that's a real word, and simplifying that and adding clearer information. You may not see on screen, but the now playing is at the top in very faint text. That's now moved more front and center with very clear signposting of where you are in the experience. The ethos again here, simplicity, elegance, and clear signposting. The next most common area, and this was one of the greatest areas of focus, is what you would know as a now and next bar. In Horizon, historically, that's not what it was. There was now and next, and then there would also be associated recommendations, access to apps, and a very slightly jumbled selection of content. What customers preferred, what we've returned back to, is a two-way now and next, up and down for channels, left and right, forwards and backwards in time. At all times, you see what's there, what's playing, and you've got clear visibility, channel branding, and where you are in that experience. This, for customers, seems simple, but it is basic and well appreciated and conforms to the fast, sleek, and simple principles. Moving forward, another key area of interaction is the information pages. Historically, in the old version, what we had was a system where you'd have to go in and in and in, and from these pages, you then see a mixture below of actions and extra information. It was also, in many ways, not really showcasing what the content is about in terms of imagery, text. The synopsis would normally go on screen, and you'd have to go to another page to read the full one. So a page here where you've got multiple clicks to do anything that you might normally do with content is replaced by a much more visually enticing, much simpler flat screen. All the key actions are there, the primary, secondary metadata in terms of imagery, synopsis, and then the details like subtitles and languages are all clearly displayed with cast information and below that, content recommendations. EPGs, the differences here are quite stark in terms of a grid is a grid, right? But not quite, because here again, by presenting directly the information about what's on in screen, you don't have to go in and out all the time. So again, multiple interactions are saved and streamlined. The now playing window means you also retain continuity with your viewing experience at the same time. And again, forwards and backwards are clear. With the easy to access filters at the top, you can go to days just by simply selecting which day you want, as opposed in the previous version you'd have to either scroll or press the fast forward, which is a bit of a hidden feature to move forward day by day by day. Here you can go forwards up to 14 days and back however many days are in the replay catalogue. The channel options as well, shortcut access to favourites, which is a key area of customers' personal preferences. In terms of what you might call saved content, this is obviously one of the most personalised areas for a user. This, in the legacy version, was distributed in different parts of the UI. To see your current rentals, you'd go to the on-demand. To see your recordings, you'd go into a library area, and that would also show up your recordings, and elsewhere you'd see your planned recordings. And this was sprinkled in different places. In the new approach, everything is in one area. The recordings, the watch list, and your rented, planned and future and past recordings are also visible, and everything presented much more clearly and graphically so that you can see and navigate to the information much clearer. This is one of the sort of hearts of the screen, and again, because this is on the main menu, it's much easier to access, obviously as well via buttons on the remote control. On-demand is another area where simplicity has really paid off. The combination on the menu of showcase strips and folders, of which, and then you have to navigate up and down and in and out, is replaced by a much more traditional and simplistic grid. Clear contextual labeling, which is vital for telling the user where they are, what they're looking at, with here a much more engaging approach to things like recommendations and content promotion. So one feature here is that what you're seeing here is recommended, but you are probably not sure why or what it is you're engaging with. But here everything is labelled, everything is also presented in screen in a particularly well thought out order. At the top, what you're currently watching, continue watching, consistently anchored in that position. And as you go down, you're getting showcases based on personal recommendations, what else other people are watching, what's new, and other thematic swim lanes. And then across the top, the menu shows the key divisions of the content. Search is one area where the changes were relatively minor, but also intrinsically quite beneficial. Again, in keeping with the previous focus paradigm of the navigation, you'd search for things and you'd then have to go in, or you'd see these pop up as you scroll down. So finding out what you'd found would be, again, quite laborious. By simply surfacing content with key information such as, is it watchable, how many seasons, what channel is it on, when it's on, it makes a much simpler way to get through the screen. One of the interesting parts about search is how we have it accessible on the system. With the UI now, it's there as an icon on every screen, but to be told, truth be told, that's not and never has been the main way in. One of the clever features of the remote control is that if you turn it, there's a full screen keyboard, and if you flip it over, start typing, you're straight into search. So that makes the search very accessible. But behind the scenes, this was very simply a UI change. The content available in terms of what you can find remained the same, but there were obviously ongoing improvements just to the algorithm to make it much more tuned to typing in letters. Clearly, one area of big evolution from 2012 to today is how important and critical apps are to the content experience. So again, by putting these off the main menu and by bringing in a more graphically enriched app store, that allows for much greater access. Plus, this area, like everywhere else, has elements of personalisation, but also promotional areas as well. Excuse me. That's a very quick summary of the high-level changes to the UI. In terms of what this has delivered so far, when this launched in Poland, Czech and Austria, there was an instant and quite unprecedented improvement in NPS in terms of customers very simply having, loving it in basic terms. As we move forward, our plan is very much to deploy this UI and evolve it to multiple markets elsewhere in Europe. And below the skin of that, that involves not just changing the UI, but as I say, having a huge impact on how we go about delivering and how we bring a lot more in-house. Naturally, everything you've seen here is also reflected on the multi-screen elements as this becomes increasingly what we call a 360 experience, which is as you'd expect. Moving forward, new hardware and extending this from the platform is on today elsewhere, and rolling in, of course, an ongoing roadmap for new features and elements. So that's the overview. I'm now ready for questions.
I like that speech. It was under time.
How far in
It's fine. Can you tell us actually what was all the UI changes that you've been making? What was the rationale behind it? Was it user focus groups? Was it sort of Steve Jobs, somebody in the background being a visionary and saying, right, this is how we're going to do it?
Well, you can always have too many of those visionaries. So yes, throughout the history of the project, well, even going back to when Horizon launched, there's a fairly strong focus on listening to customer feedback and identifying most wanted features, biggest core driving issues. So they had always been bubbling away, and the initial, 2012, 13, 14, as Horizon was deployed to more and more countries, it was updated as it went to resolve that. The decision, though, to decide to not just evolve and have more of a revolution did come from a number of simultaneous places. So one area is obviously very much a customer-centric view that says this is the thing that is demanded by customers. Another is we look at the data and the numbers and see where we need to transform how the system is used and identifying usage. But yeah, I would say there's a few very strong visionaries in terms of what we're there to achieve and driving that, because to make such a revolutionary decision to say, yeah, that goes away and now we're going to follow this approach on the scale that we're doing it at, that's very much led from very high up in the management tray. So yeah, a jobs-like view.
And were those UI changes reflected in the TV Anywhere
app? Yes. Yeah, and increasingly those are, well, the TV Anywhere app you're referring to, I think, is the one here in the UK, correct? So that's...
Indeed, yeah.
Right, so that's but across the Horizon Go system, that is a similar and increasingly going to be a harmonized experience, yes. So, I mean, that's natural, that's what customers expect. You want to see the same thing on every screen, and you want to have that seamless transition as you move around.
Yeah. Questions?
Hi, Eric from Discovery. I just had a quick question regarding the content recommendation. I was wondering, how do you guys base your recommendations? Is this something done automatically, or do you have teams in charge of doing this, in particular for VOD? So
there's the thing I'm most directly responsible for is the recommendation engine that sits behind a lot of these screens. That's we've integrated Think Analytics in that, but that does work in tandem with the various content promotions teams, the editorial teams. So there's elements of both, and one of the main advantages of the new UI actually is a lot more space and potential for partner branding in those areas and sort of recognizing those main brands. So that's a factor behind what we've done. But predominantly, most of the recommendations the customer sees are going to be automated. They're either personalized or collaborative or related to the content, and just depends on the use case and the context of the user. But there is always an opportunity and always a strong need in every market to say, these are the things we need to promote, and pushing those, particularly in VOD. Yeah.
Anyone else? Paul?
So, Debbie from Channel 5. So, if you're using a mostly sort of automated algorithmic recommendations engine, is there a sort of mandated registration? Do you have to sign in effectively to use the service?
Yeah, because we're the sort of cable provider
in
multiple countries. So you, obviously on the set-top box you don't need to sign in, but we know who you are.
Okay.
And as you sign in to use the OTT apps, it's matched and synchronized between the two. But yeah, it's not we don't operate as a free-to-air video service.
Okay, cheers.
Hi. I'm just going to ask, sorry, Olivia from Freeview Play. I just wanted to ask a practical question. So your UI looks very beautiful and it's very image rich. Could you talk a bit about the challenges of sourcing those images, how you cut them, whether it's okay to overlay on them, the shading, all that kind of stuff?
Yes. Well, now I may go over time. You want to get into the nitty-gritty of metadata supply. So, I mean, one thing I sort of skipped over was, I talked about multiple European markets. It's like, we're in 8 countries, wow. But actually, and I'm sort of putting up screens here in grids, and it's a grid screen, it's a posters on. How hard can it be? I mean, one big factor is TV, traditional TV, is a lot more complex than, just a standalone VOD service, because as well as you've got to deal with multiple customers on different entitlements, different packages. And then when you get to countries like Switzerland, you've got highly regionalized services that work in different multiple languages. So that adds a huge amount of complexity in terms of the content supply. So one element is even getting the text right is a big focus of getting the right descriptions in multiple languages so that the metadata's there. And then the quality of the images, it's a huge ongoing, never-ending race to improve that quality. And it sort of benefits, or it works at different speeds in different areas. So with some content, and the showcase content, Hollywood content, getting high-quality images is less of an issue. But if you're going to speak to a Polish TV station and they've got a hospital drama or a detective show like Object Matters, and every single episode has the same default poster, it becomes a bit more, it actually raises the bar, because you've moved from a stage where everything can be placed as a text, and now you want pictures, but then you're going to need to have more pictures, and you need to have episodic images. So there is an element where we have to tackle that in terms of content suppliers and studio suppliers and metadata suppliers. There's an element of where you'll automate and try and do captioning if you get the permissions, and then when you try and do that, you've got to obviously get the right moment, and that's, again, an artistic challenge as well. And then when you finally get all of those, you've got to think, well, for the UI to work at this resolution, you've got to think about speed, because the more quality and the more images, it does have a cost and an impact. So without fully answering your question, yes, it's a huge challenge. At this point, lots of things, it's a constantly improving situation, but there's a whole big world out there of content that is less well, sort of, it just doesn't get any care and attention. If it's some daytime show in Prague, that it becomes a challenge.
Hi. Which of the changes has been the most successful?
I think it's hard to, it isn't, I mean, it also depends how you measure it. So the big factor for us is NPS, and that's measured more as a product level. So there isn't a particular, that worked better than others at that level. If you look below that at some of the usage and the general feedback, I think one of the, I think the now and next bar, because that is more invoked and touches more and more usage all the time. That's a huge win. The on-demand area, I think from a visual point of view and from something that gives us a platform going forward to continue to add more content and really beautify, that's a big part. And then from my own view, I think the way that we've moved the recommendations off from the old horizon, it's a main menu item, that's great, but you really have to dig in and really have to know what you want to see in there. Now we sprinkle them throughout the UI, we put them in a lot more places, making them a lot more personal and contextual, and that has a big impact in terms of customers' engagement with those. So it's different aspects depending on how you measure it. We, as a major operator, we measure things in many different ways, right from what are they watching, why are they watching, and what impact that has.
Who did the front-end development work? In-house or external company?
Do you mean the
UI
a lot more, predominantly in-house.
Right.
Which for us has been quite different. I mean, in terms of how that's led, but also not just the UI design, but the development. We use a lot of agencies, or some in particular, but the sort of scale that they're working at and the scale of the project, it was much bigger than, so the design you saw, the first design was very much based on a NDS Snowflake design, and that was sort of bought in to some extent with some customization. This whole project in-house, which has had a transformative effect in terms of the organisation, how we work together, collaborate, and all the methodologies and going agile and all those other buzzwords.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks, actually.